Hi everyone, welcome to today's streaming of the furthest distance I've travelled. Apologies if the light is a bit weird, I'm on my own for the first time doing this, so we'll see what we do. Anyway, the furthest distance I've travelled essentially is about a poem. No, it's a poem about someone who went travelling when they were younger. And as we can see in the title, we've got a few key things. First thing is the personal pronoun I. It's clear that this is a personal poem, first person narration. And also we've got the superlative furthest. So that gives us an indication straight away that this person has travelled very, very far in their lifetime, but the furthest that they've travelled will be a little bit different to just places, which will sort of come clear in the poem later on. Okay, looking at the first stanza, the first few words, like many folk. So it starts off with a very kind of conversational style, quite colloquial with the word folk. And it also suggests that this is a kind of a group experience, a collaboration. It's not just one person who's travelled. Lots of us have travelled in our lifetime. So like many folk, the speaker of the poem acknowledges that she isn't the only person to have ever gone, he or she, isn't the only person to have ever gone travelling. I say he or she because we can't tell a gender in this poem, and although it has been said that this is an autobiographical poem where the writer herself went travelling, obviously that doesn't have to be the case. We can interpret it as just the experience of any traveller. So like many folk, that conversational style, that colloquial language to begin the poem. When I first saddled a rucksack, feeling its weight. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear the word saddled, I automatically think of kind of horses. And so we just get this idea, though, of her and quite, I guess, a vivid visual imagery of the speaker carrying all their possessions on their back. You know, they're backpacking, they're traveling, and so saddled to their back is their rucksack. But interestingly, we get this line, feeling its weight. And for me, that suggests that this is kind of maybe going to be a grounding experience. People often say that you go traveling to find yourself, to discover yourself. And so perhaps it alludes to the idea that this is going to be a very important moment in the speaker's life, feeling its weight. It's a monumental moment in the speaker's life. So feeling its weight on my back, the way my spine curved under it like a meridian. So we've got a simile at the end of stanza 1, like a meridian. Meridian are these lines over here, these imaginary lines that go around the equator. And as you can see, essentially, the poet is trying to get us to think about this curve. Obviously, quite deliberate use of simile here, linking with the idea of travel and linking the idea with going around the world. And we get the visual imagery again of that big rucksack on the speaker's back. So that's the first stanza. I thought, yes, this is how to live. So we've got this confident, joyful tone coming through in the poem here. Yes, this is how to live. It's clear that the speaker enjoyed their travels, thought that their travels were good, were worthwhile. We've got the full stop here, and we've got the monosyllabic language, so words of one syllable. This is how to live, which makes this line of the poem sound very, very definite, very, very certain. This is how to live. They are asserting something. This is a strong declaration of how they feel about going traveling, and say that, yes, that euphoria, that joyful tone. Then the poet goes on to talk about kind of, again, common ideas of traveling, the Sherpa Pass between Krakow and Zagreb. So starts to kind of list places, presumably where they've been, and places that most readers probably will be familiar with as well and will associate with kind of traveling and exploration. But then interestingly, at the end of this stanza, we get the idea of a juxtaposition in traveling, I suppose. People talk about traveling to see lots of different cultures, and often those cultures being kind of full of colour and full of life and full of vitality. But they talk about how in order to get to those colourful places that are full of adventure and vitality and warmth, people spend time sitting in Siberian white cells of scattered airports. So most people, when you think about Siberia, you think about an incredibly remote place, not many people living in a massive, massive expanse. the white cells here, the idea again of airports being white, being dull, being boring, and the idea of a cell as well, that they are a place where you can feel trapped and enclosed. And I suppose there's a bit of an irony there, because people are going to these airports in order to go travelling and see the rest of the world, but in order to get there, they have to spend this time in the Siberian white cells. The one thing I didn't mention there is where we've got on the beaten track. So often we hear about the phrase, I'm going off the beaten track. So the beaten track is the track that most people take, most travellers will take. And if you go off the beaten track, you're going somewhere different to where other people have gone. But the speaker here acknowledges that they are going on the beaten track. They're going to the places where lots and lots of travellers will have gone before them, and they're not doing something perhaps new or original or extraordinary compared to other people. Okay, and then goes on with the idea, though, this idea of yes, this is how to live, and this idea, this epiphany moment, this realization of how wonderful travel is. It came clear as over a tannoy. So we've got another simile here, and again, deliberately, the writer has chosen the idea of travel imagery. So in an airport, you might hear a tannoy announcing, your gate being open, your departure, and please make your way to the gate. So they carry on with this idea of travel imagery, and it came really, really clear to them, like it was a loudspeaker being announced to them, that this is the way to live, this is how brilliant travel is. So it came clear as over a tannoy that in restlessness, in anonymity, was some kind of destiny. We've got the end stop here, which sort of signifies the end of this section of the poem, and this section of the poem is really about how wonderful travel is, how great travel is. And again, that idea came to them really, really clearly, as if it was being announced on a loudspeaker, as with the simile, as over a tannoy. But interestingly, the poet has chosen to enjambe the word anonymity. And so we're left with miti on its own here, which is quite unusual, and you can come up with your own interpretations as to why you think the writer might have done that, but two possible interpretations. So one, for me, looking at miti, on its own, it could also look like mighty. So maybe it's the idea that traveling is a mighty, a powerful experience, an incredible thing to do. But also some people have interpreted the fact that it splits up the word anonymity, suggests that kind of conflict between when you're traveling, you are a stranger in lots of places, you're anonymous to people. And so there's a kind of conflict idea that you go to these new lands to find yourself and to know who you are, but ultimately you are a stranger in those new lines. So perhaps the word being split is to draw attention towards the conflict between those two ideas. If you've got any other ideas, then please let me know. And then again, that very definitive, strong, declarative sentence was some kind of destiny. So the idea of destiny, that the speaker feels like this is what they were meant to do. There's something wonderful and joyful about this experience. As always, these PowerPoints will be uploaded to the SharePoint, so you can look at the notes in more detail afterwards if you need time. And obviously this video, you can pause and go back over things should you need to. Okay, but as said, that end stop is really, really important. It's a clear divide here in the poems. This is kind of the first section of the poem over with, and then we're going to move on to the second half of the poem. And the second half of the poem, like some of the other poems that we've looked at recently, like To Mine Annual Self, there's now a distance in narration. This is the older narrator looking back, reflecting on when they were young, and they're now in the present moment, where they are in the moment, thinking back to their days travelling when they were younger. And they start to explain perhaps why they stopped travelling, or start to think about why they might have stopped travelling. So whether it was the scare stories about Larium, the threats of delirium and baldness that led me not to a Western Union wiring money with 6 words of Lithuanian, and it goes on to say in the next stanza, but to this post office. So essentially the speaker is saying, perhaps the reason why I stopped travelling, the reason why I'm not in a Western Union, which is an American bank that they have them all around the world. If you go travelling and you wanted to send money or receive money, you'd go into your Western Union. So the speaker is not there, not in that kind of travelling bank, with the little Lithuanian they have, probably trying to explain to someone in Lithuania that they want to send some money or receive some money. they're not there. And maybe one of the reasons why they're not there is because there were scare stories about Larium. Larium is a malaria tablet, and one of the side effects is believed to be that you could have hallucinations, and with hallucinations you might do some really terrible things. So, perhaps that was a reason why the speaker stopped traveling, because they were worried about malaria, or they were worried about the side effects of the malaria tablets, which could be delirium, going crazy, having hallucinations, or even perhaps going bald. So maybe it was that stopped them traveling. And so he said, rather than being in the Western Union, in that sort of travelling bank, they're in a post office, that may be quite domestic image at home in their local post offices, with a handful of bills. And this is kind of an American poem, so when we talk about bills, we're talking about money, okay, like dollar bills rather than bills to pay. Although from a British audience, even to have a handful of bills would still make sense, and you could go to your post office to pay your bills. So you can have those different interpretations, which may or may not be deliberate by the poet. A handful of bills and a gyro. Again, a gyro is something that doesn't exist that much anymore, but it's just basically a bank check, or something again to get money. So that's why I'm here with my bills and my checks, not at that Western Union, not traveling anymore. And why, if I'm stuffing smalls hastily into a holdall, I'm less likely to be catching a greyhound from Madison to Milwaukee. So it goes on to talk about, again, if I'm stuffing smalls, again, colloquial expression for underwear, into a holdall, into a bag, then I'm less likely. It's not because I'm taking a greyhound, which again was a bus that people would take, that you can use to travel great distances in America, in Australia, places like that. I'm not doing that. The reason I'm not stuffing my smalls into a bag because I'm going traveling. Essentially, what the speaker says on the next stanza is, I'm stuffing my smalls into a bag because I've got some laundry to do. I've left it too long to wash my clothes. So possibly they're going to a laundrette, probably the most obvious image, or if they're just doing laundry in their house, they're putting it into their bag to wash, but probably the laundrette. Is really beyond me. So maybe not entirely sure if they were the reasons why they stopped traveling, the scare stories about delirium and all those sorts of things, or why they are wasting time before doing their washing. Not sure about those things, but we get the end, again, full stop here to kind of end that thought, I suppose, because like many of the poems, this poem is like a stream of consciousness. It's like a dialogue. The first person is kind of telling us what they think. That full stop, and then this word on its own, obviously, is the poet really drawing our attention. So that, however, so this is a change, this is a new point, this is another shift in the poem, the second key shift in the poem. However, when during routine evictions, and evictions here I'm taking to mean kind of clearing out, but again, I guess playing on the words of travel and change and being evicted from a place, but when during routine evictions, sort outs, clear outs, I discover, probably quite deliberate again, use of language here, discover linked to the idea of traveling. The speaker says that when she does these things, she discovers alien pants. Again, pants, American trousers, strange trousers. So perhaps when they went traveling, they bought some strange trousers from some different country, perhaps, or just the clothes they wore traveling are very different to what they wear now in their adult life. The cinema stubs, the throwaway comment on a post-it. So as they're clearing out, they start to come across paraphernalia from when they were traveling, mementos, memories, or a tiny stowaway pressed flower amid bottom drawers. They start to find things that maybe they'd collected that when they were traveling meant something to them. I know these are my souvenirs. So again, the language of travel, keeping something which is important that you have when you go traveling. And from these, and then the metaphoric language here again, referring to those finds as crushed valentines. So valentines, obviously full of love, crushed perhaps because they no longer are traveling anymore, and part of that wonderful feeling has been dimmed slightly. And obviously perhaps just alluding to the age and how those things now are not in pristine condition, that they are literally crushed. This unraveled sports sock, that the furthest distances I've travelled have been between those people. So obviously really, really important line of the poem, the key line, if you like, almost like an epigrammatic character of a Shakespearean sonnet. This sums up the whole poem. The furthest distance I've travelled have been between those people. So the speaker acknowledges that actually the most wonderful thing about travelling is not the places, but it's the people that you meet, that welcome you to their country or to their culture, or to their home, whatever it is. That's the most important thing. And what survives of holidaying briefly in their lives, the most important things about travelling is those memories that you have and those important moments. Like lots of the poems as well, we've got this word briefly. So we've got this idea of time, about these things being temporary and being short-lived and not lasting long enough, possibly. Okay, so that's the poem annotated. The only thing I'm going to finish with saying is already start to get you to think about connections to other poems, because you know in your exam you'll be given a poem and asked to compare it to another poem. So it's worthwhile thinking about the themes that are in this poem and what it can link to. You might have some ideas already yourself about which poems you could possibly link to. So as I ended there, this poem is about a passing of time. So like some of the other poems, you've got what the speaker was like when they were younger compared to now. You've got that change in time, the idea of a journey through time. You've got moments of reflection and nostalgia. So again, we've had that in both of the last two poems that I've taken you through, the To My 9-Year-Old Self and The Easy Passage, where there's a moment of the speaker or the narrator reflecting on their experiences previously. If you were comparing in terms of style, we've got enjambment in here. We've got that enjambed line of that anonymity being split. This poem has images of travel. Some of our other poems have images of travel, or obviously you could just compare the different imagery that's in this poem and that's in other poems. We've got similes. Again, you can compare it to other poems that have similes as well, but this time the overall theme of the poem is this kind of the poet playing on the words, so choosing words in the similes or in the metaphors that connect with the theme of travel. And we have that, even if you think about Coming to Dover poem, we've talked about how perhaps some of the language, the gobfuls of phlegm, are kind of metaphoric for perhaps the persecution that the migrant might face in Britain. So that play on words is what I mean by that. This poem has energy and joy. You've got the, this is what it's all about sort of idea. And like lots of the poems as well, you've got a conversational tone using colloquial language, so you can think about other poems that have that as well. Okay, so that is the furthest distance I've travelled. Hope you've enjoyed. Thank you. Bye.